Hello there, my lovely old lovelies. Brother Bernard here. And I hope you're all very, very cosy in your homes or wherever you might be in this strange old, funny old, strange, funny old kind of strange time for the island of Britain and indeed for the whole world. It's sad that there's going to be all sorts of festivals cancelled where we could be sharing stories and having fun, but it's not the first time that the folk of Britain have faced a period of uncertainty, let's say. And I've got a tale all about that from the little English village of Shillington in Bedfordshire, which I must admit I've never actually been to, but I wonder what traces of our tale might remain there one day. But anyway, talking of one day, that's a way that we usually start a story, but this is different. This is about having fun, the people of Britain having fun together. I mean, you might look forward to Christmas or Easter every year, or even the summer solstice every 21st of June. But there was a time, just a few hundred years ago, when the good folk of Britain had a whole host of different feast days to look forward to all year round, especially at the turning of the seasons. Meat and drink would be shared, songs would be sung, and games would be played as the hardships of life were tucked away for the occasion, and everyone mucked in to share their happiness and gratitude for what they all had together. This had been the case for thousands of years. I mean, the reasons for getting together and having parties may have changed as different beliefs came and went, but the people always had their fun when the day's work was done. That was until on a cold day in the middle of the 1600s, things changed. A politician who called himself Oliver Cromwell, it was his name, but he still called himself that, he defeated King Charles I, you know, the beardy fella with the big long hair, in the English Civil War and chopped the king's head clean off. And from that day forward, a bunch of religious crazies called the Puritans were in charge of the whole country. Scary times. These Puritans believed in simplicity and humility and, worst of all, in never ever having any kind of a good time, because they were certain that they would be rewarded for their glum, sad lives after they were dead. This meant that there would be no more cakes and ale at times of traditional merriment. Songs would have to make do with only one or maybe two notes, and giggling on a Sunday was punishable with violence. From coast to coast, Britain was now told to behave itself, and the people could forget about Easter and midsummer and, yes, even Christmas. But they couldn't stop absolutely everyone having fun, as one little boy and girl discovered one midsummer eve in the middle of Shillington, to the north of the smoky old city of London. This little pair, let's call them Sue and Jeff, because, I mean, that probably is what they were called. They lived by the village church, which was, of course, run by Puritans. This one warm June evening, they had said their prayers, as they were ordered to by the Puritan elders, and they'd gone to bed. But they felt like they'd only been dozing for a few minutes when they were awoken by the distant sound of extraordinary singing and merriment in the field just outside their cottage. Making extra certain not to disturb their parents as they snored loudly away in the next room, the two little adventurers crept to the back door and out into the moonlit field. Forming a raucous circle right there in front of a wide-eyed Sue and Jeff was a whole bunch of, well, I mean, what would you call them? I mean, in years to come, they became labelled as goblins, but the strange odds and ends of beings that were in that circle you couldn't all sum them up by that one name. I mean, some of the happy creatures were 10 feet tall, covered in hair and horns and bright green. Others were tiny little people with beards and polka dot faces wearing golden armour. And then there were the upside down things with faces like tigers and tails like monkeys. And not to mention the orange striped weirdos. Now, they really were, just weird. Anyway, whatever the creatures actually were, they were merry and they were kind, and they quickly welcomed the young lass and lad into their party. The whole gaggle of oddities danced around so happily, they sang and laughed, and they blithely shared leafy flagons filled from a gigantic punch bowl full of a sparkling brew that seemed to change colour with every dip of the ladle. Young Sue and Jeff couldn't remember a great deal about that midsummer party, except that they had the best time ever with those goblins. and they certainly always remembered one song that all of those goblins took great pleasure in singing out loud, lustily and merrily. Summer is a-comin' in, time to laugh and jump and sing. What we call joy they call a sin. You can't do down a goblin. They will try and stop our cheer, but we will jump and jape and jeer every turn of every year. You can't do down a goblin. Keep your silly human rules. We will dance and drink and drool. Enjoy your life, for you're a fool. You can't do down a goblin. Lovely song that was. It's one of my favourites. I always listen to it every morning, funnily enough. Anyway, the next morning after that party, as the sun rose, there was not a single sign of the goblins' larksome party in the field, just two very happy little children in the dawn dew who swore to each other that they would never tell anybody else about what they saw and what fun they'd had. For more than 10 long years, the Puritans held down the happiness of the people of Shillington and elsewhere, but every turning of the year, whether it was in the middle of summer or the depths of winter, the goblins held their jolly party right there in the field. And every year, the growing Sue and Jeff were invited to join in the dance. At long last, however, the Puritans fell out of power, and the jolly King Charles II restored the monarchy to the throne of England, bringing back all the old traditions, the parties, and of course, Christmas. And Sue and Jeff became musicians for every royal festivity, talented lasses and lads that they were. From the moment the new Charles parked his bottom on the throne, there was no more need for the goblins to keep their vigil. However, when they returned home to Shillington at each turn of the season to play their music, Sue and Jeff could not help noticing that when the folk of the village were enjoying themselves, singing and dancing as they always used to, a small circle of mushrooms, a kind of fungus henge, if you will, grew right there in the field where the goblins had their parties. And they both knew it was a kind of promise that if ever the people of Britain were going to be banned from having parties and enjoying themselves ever again, the goblins would be right there in the village green, ready to keep up the old traditions and to have a bit of a knees up. This won't last 10 years, but there'll be more stories to come. Keep warm, keep safe, and I'll see you soon.